Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. This is Friday, November 7th. This is the Shabbat of November 7th and 8th. Shabbat is the 17th of Cheshvan. The full moon passed on the 15th of Cheshvan, which was Wednesday. So Friday, today, the moon will be rising at about 5 o'clock, and it'll be about 93% full now in the waning phase of the moon. This week's parasha is Vayera, and this is the locus of the teaching and the ethic of visiting the sick. Every day in the morning prayers, part of the blessing over the Torah. After we make the blessing over studying the Torah, one of the passages that we study every day, which is based on the Shabbat on the Talmud in Shabbat 127a, it says, אלו דברים שאדם אוכל פירותיהם בעולם הזה והקרן קיימת לו לעולם הבא. ואלו הן כיבוד אב ואם וגמילות חסדים והשכמת בית המדרש שחרית וערבית והכנסת אורחים וביקור חולים והכנסת כלה ולוויית המת ועיון תפילה והבאת שלום בין אדם לחברו ובין איש לאשתו ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם. These are the precepts, the fruits of which you eat in this world, while the principle, the reward, is preserved for you in the world to come. They are honoring father and mother, performing deeds of kindness, early attendance in the house of study, morning and evening, providing hospitality to guests, visiting the sick, participating in making a wedding, accompanying the dead to the grave, concentrating on the meaning of prayers, making peace between fellow human beings and between husband and wife, and the study of Torah is equal to them all. So in that list of precepts that have no measure is the precept of visiting the sick, bikur cholim. Now of this in the Talmud, Rava says, Rava Amar afilu me'a pe'amim beyom. Even 100 times per day, you could visit a sick person. The more you visit them, the better. And it similarly says, Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Rabbi Acha bar Chanina, kol hamevaker chole notel echad mishishim b'tza'aro. Anyone who visits a sick person, an ill person, takes from them 1/60th of their suffering. And the sages say to him, Amrili, imken li alun shitin velok muha. If that's the case, then you should send 60 people in to stand the ill person up, which means to heal them. Because if one person takes away 1/60th of the suffering, then you should send 60 people to make them completely well. So this act of visiting the sick falls under the category of ve'havta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow human being as yourself. And it also captures the mitzvah of halachta bidrachav, of walking in God's ways, which we understand to mean to imitate the ways of God. So the Talmud has this beautiful passage where it says, V'amar Rabbi Chama b'Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Chanina, says, what is the meaning of that which is written, Acharei Hashem Elohechem telechu, after Hashem you should walk. And the verse continues, and God you shall fear, and God's commandments you shall keep, and unto God's voice you shall hearken, and unto God you shall serve, and unto God you shall cleave. And the Talmud asks us, how is that possible? How could you walk after Hashem? It says, Kavar na'amar ki Hashem Elohecha esh ochlahu. If Hashem is a consuming fire, as it says in Deuteronomy 4, if Hashem is a consuming fire, how is it possible to walk after God? But rather they say, what this means to halachta bidrachav, to walk in God's ways, ela lehalech achar midotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is that you should follow the attributes of the Holy One of blessing. And then there they provide examples. Just as God clothes the naked, as it is written, and Hashem Elohim made for Adam and his wife garments of skin and clothed them, so too you should clothe the naked. Just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu visits the sick with regard to God's appearing to Abraham following his circumcision, it says, and Hashem appeared to Abraham in the terebinths of Mamre. So too you should visit the sick, just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Holy One, consoles mourners, as it is written, and it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed Isaac his son, so too you should console mourners. And just as HaKadosh Baruch Hu buries the dead, as it is written, and he was buried in the valley in the land of Moab, speaking of Moshe, so too you should bury the dead. So we imitate the ways of kindness and mercy of God, and so that here the Talmud says, just as God visits the sick, visited Avraham, which comes from this week's parasha, which we'll get to in a moment. You should also visit the sick. This is a way of imitating God, of walking in God's ways, of fulfilling the mitzvah of halachta bidrachav. The Pnine Halacha, who's a contemporary Israeli posek, halachist, says, Shekol ha-mitzvot sheben adam lachavero, that all mitzvot that are that are in the category of mitzvot that happen between people, between one person and another person, nichlalut lama'aseh tachat mitzvah ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that all of these mitzvot that are about relationships between humans fall under the category of the mitzvah ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow human being as yourself. So this act of kindness of visiting the sick falls into that category. And I want to tie this into something that I learned from Robin Wall Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass, where she talks about how smaller earth-based traditions, indigenous traditions, understand they have economies of giving. She calls it economies of giving. It's a gift-giving economy. And a gift is not something that one person gives and the other one receives and keeps it, but rather it's a flow. So you give and that person receives and gives, and that person receives and gives, and you are always giving in a chain, in a reciprocal act of giving and receiving. So just as people who are sick need us to come visit them, chas v'chalila, at some point we may need those visits. And these visits really are quite critical for someone's well-being. There's actually research that shows that prayers for the sick and visits to the sick actually improve the person's chances of recovering significantly. So this is vital. I've seen this in my own life. Just recently, at my old congregation, a very beloved member of the community became quite ill, was on death's door. She did not want visitors because she felt guilty for bringing people in to see her in such a state. She didn't want to upset them or cause them sort of internal tsuris from seeing her in such a bad way. But her condition continued to decline until I made a very edgy executive decision that people had to go visit her. As soon as people started visiting her, her condition improved. So these visits are vital. My beloved grandmother, Aleha Shalom, when she was very, very ill in the hospital, also on death's door, I went and spent the night in the hospital with her in her room. And the next day, she began recovering. We did not think she was going to recover. It was a very serious pneumonia, and she recovered. So visits for the to the sick are critical for the well-being of the neshama of the person, and the well-being of the soul is vital to a person's healing. The well-being of our soul is very much connected to our physical health. Um, and this is true for all forms of illness of mind, body, and soul. So no matter what the illness is, people need the support of caring company. It's vital. It's vital. It can be mamash, a matter of life and death. The other reason that Bikur Cholim is shown to be critical for the well-being of a patient, for example, if the person is in a hospital setting, if a patient has visitors, the doctors and the nurses sort of automatically, by human nature, start paying more attention to that patient. And that's obviously going to benefit the patient. How does all of this come from this week's parasha? It actually begins in last week's parasha. And it's important to remember here something about the Torah is that the verses and chapters were inserted by Christian scholars later, and Jews for the most part adopted the chapters and verses that Christian scholars inserted into the text. So, but the way these read in the Torah, if you've ever looked at a Torah, there are no chapters, there are no verses. So these sections don't exist in the ways that we have come used to them. So you'll see how that plays out in this. Um, so God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and his son Ishmael, as well as all of the men of his household. So presumably at least 300 people. Um, so it says, Abraham took Ishmael and his son and all that were born in his house and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the self same day as God had said to him. And Abraham was 99 years old when he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In that self same day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son. All the men of his house, born in the house and bought with money of a stranger, were circumcised with him. Then the story seems to just continue. It says, and Hashem appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre, the Elone Mamre, the sacred oak grove of Mamre, as he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. So there's an old tradition um, that after Abraham was circumcised, 3 days later is when he is sitting in the tent, at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. The third day after circumcision for an adult is the hardest day of recovery. This was confirmed for me, by the way, um, by a Ukrainian Jewish immigrant that I knew who was circumcised as an adult when he was in yeshiva. And he confirmed that the third day was definitely the most uncomfortable, the hardest recovery day. So Abraham is sitting outside, um, recovering from this illness when God appears to him, the Elone Mamre, in the oak trees of Mamre. So the Gemara, the Talmud says, for example, in Bava Metzia 86b, it says, Vayera elav Hashem be'elone Mamre. So God appeared to him in the oak trees of Mamre, v'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel kachom hayom, as he was sitting at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. My kachom hayom, what does the heat of the day have to do with this? And Amar Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina says, Oto hayom yom shlishi shel mil'ah shel Abraham haya. This was the third day after Abraham's circumcision. Uva HaKadosh Baruch Hu lish'ol ba'Abraham, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One, came to ask of Abraham's well-being. Um, and then it says that the Holy One, Blessed One, came to visit Abraham in his vulnerable state of healing. So from that act, from that midrashic interpretation of this verse, we base this whole teaching, this is the locus of the teaching about the importance of visiting the sick. And it is a way in which when we do this as human beings, we are imitating the ways of God. When we say, for example, that Hashem is the Rofei Chol Basar, the healer of all flesh, sometimes people heal and we don't even know how they got healed. There are things that we call miraculous when it comes to healing, but so much healing happens um, through the visiting the sick, or it happens through the medical intervention, or the intervention of an acupuncturist or a midwife or a shaman, whatever happens, there are people involved. So this is one of the ways that we reveal as human beings. We reveal the face of God. We reveal the kindness of God by imitating the ways of God, by imitating the kindness, the vast kindness of Hashem. Um, and again, that is a mitzvah to imitate to the best of our ability the vast kindness and beneficence of Hashem. So when we do that, when we perform those acts of showing up for people in their times of need, when they're sick in mind, body, or soul, we are revealing, we become the face of the Shekhinah, we become the face of God. We bring Hashem into this plane, revealing the kindness and the beneficence that underlies all creation. So, sending everyone mamash the warmest blessings for a peaceful and restorative and healing Shabbat. Um, there's a lot going on this weekend, so I hope I see many of you coming up in the next 24 or 48 hours. All right, good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom.